Hello, everyone. Welcome to Making Phone Calls. My name is Charles Theodore Monk, and I will be your presenter today. For those of you who can hear me, please go ahead and let me know by saying hello in the chat or by saying yes, I can hear you. Because let's be honest, if you can't hear me, it will be a little difficult to understand everything in this presentation. So if you can hear me, please go ahead and let me know in the chat by simply saying hello or yes, I can hear you. Awesome. Some people have been doing that already. The rest of you, I know there's plenty of you guys out there. Go ahead and let me know. Awesome. Hello, everyone. It's great that you guys are here. I'm so excited as always. All right, so you can hear me and see me good. That's great. That's good news. So I'll give about another 30 seconds to a minute just for other people to come in to the presentation because, sometimes we do run late and that's all right. But for those of you who are here already, I want to encourage you guys to maybe get a piece of paper and a ball pen or take something to get some notes because there's a lot of very useful information in this presentation, and I do hope you guys will be able to take down some notes so that you can practice on your own, right? We want to practice on our own because we don't want information coming in this ear and going out the other, right? We want to be able to memorize or keep the stuff we learn in our heads. And sometimes the best way to do that is to take down some notes. You will memorize more when you do take down notes. So, for those of you who are here, I highly encourage you guys to take down notes. I know it is extra work, but it is worth it because you will be able to memorize more, right? And that's the whole point of learning a language, right? Is you want to memorize, you want to learn new things. So I encourage you guys, take down some notes, all right? So let me break down everything we're going to discuss today. We're going to talk about, obviously, making phone calls in a business context. We're going to talk about some scenarios we're going to be in. We're going to talk about how we have to behave when we're making phone calls, and we'll learn some interesting vocabulary as well, all right? And we're going to go on today for about 30 minutes. I'm going to do my best to wrap up at the 30-minute mark because I do want to be mindful of you guys' time, right? But I am so thankful for each and every one of you that came in today because it does show that you want to learn more, right? And that's awesome, guys. And remember, we are all lifelong learners, right? We're not going to memorize every single thing in the world. We learn as we grow up, right? Throughout our lives, there are going to be things that we're going to learn that we didn't know before, all right? So if there are things you don't know in this presentation, don't get upset at yourself, all right? Just make sure you're going to do your best to memorize it and keep it in your head, all right? So, if there are any questions throughout the presentation, you may feel free to ask, but there's actually going to be a Q&A section at the end of the presentation where you can ask your questions and I will do my best to answer them, right? So, I encourage you guys, if you have questions, just keep it and then ask it during the Q&A section so it does not get lost in the chat, all right? And if there are actually any questions I ask that involve you guys' participation, I encourage you guys use the chat to answer the questions. They're not going to be super complicated, but right, it's also important that we practice what we're learning, right? If we don't practice what we learn, it's going to leave our heads, right? So let's get into this presentation, guys. And obviously, we're going to be talking about making phone calls. We live in a world where almost every single person in a good country, or simply even in certain countries that are not so well off, have phones, right? And phones are the best way that we have for communication nowadays, right? We can call people, we can text people, we can email people, we can even video chat now, right? So making phone calls is something super important that we should know how to do. And obviously for us in a business context, we should learn how to have or how to simply just even make phone calls, right? Because some of us have a little struggle when it comes to speaking over the phone. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. So I'm going to do my best to explain the best ways to do that. All right. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about three main scenarios when it comes to making phone calls, all right? The first one is you talk to your boss. So obviously a boss is someone who's in charge of you, right? Maybe the manager, maybe the owner of the company, whoever, your team leader, right? Whoever's in charge of you, we could be considered your boss, right? And then the second scenario we're going to talk about are your coworkers. So coworkers are the people you work with, right? The people in your team, the people in your department, the people in your company, right? Those are all your coworkers. So we're going to talk about how do we talk to our coworkers, and then we're going to talk about our clients, all right? And our clients are people who use our company for certain things, right? They are our clients, okay? Awesome. So let's talk about the first scenario that we're bringing up, and that is talking to our bosses, all right? But before we do that, we're going to go over some rules, all right? Now, there actually are rules to having conversation, whether that's in person or over the phone or over some piece of technology. There are some rules that we should abide by, all right? And these are the parts where I encourage you guys to take down some notes of the vocabulary that we're going to learn, okay? So, term number one is pace. So, pace is the speed of speaking. How fast you speak is your pace, all right? I could be talking like this and talking super fast, or I could be talking super slow and it will be a little boring, but having a good pace sets the conversation up, right? For either success or failure. If you talk too fast, there's going to be a lack of understanding, right? Because you're not going to be able to understand everything. And if you talk too slow, if your pace is too slow, it will be too boring, right? Obviously, you do have to adjust to the person you're talking to. So, for example, if you're speaking English and the other person doesn't speak English that well, you do want to speak a little slower. You don't want to speak super slow. You want to have a good pace based on the person that you're speaking to, right? And if you're an advanced speaker and you are an advanced speaker as well in that language, then your pace can obviously be faster, right? So your pace all depends on who you're talking to, right? If you're talking to someone who's fluent and you are fluent as well, then your pace can be faster. But if you're not talking to someone who is not fluent and you are not fluent in the language, your pace should be slower so that you do your best to not have a misunderstanding, right? So that's pace. That's term number one is our pace. That's our rule. Our next rule is our volume. So our volume is simply how loud we speak, right? We could be talking very, very loud. We could be talking very quiet. That is our volume, right? Certain people love to speak very loud, while other people don't like to speak very loud, right? So our volume is how loud we speak. And our volume should never change based on the people who are around. We always want to sound enthusiastic. We always want to sound professional, right? Our volume should never change. While there is a truth that in certain areas we want to talk louder and be and emphasize certain things, yes, that's important, but we never want to be too loud where we sound like we're almost yelling, and we never want to be too quiet where it doesn't sound like we're interested in the conversation at all. All right, now our next area is our tone. Our tone is in the manner in which you speak. So this talks about us being enthusiastic, right? We are enjoying ourselves. If we're talking super loud and we're having fun, our tone is good. But if we're super depressed and we're talking very monotone is when you're talking at the same volume. If we're talking like we don't care, then obviously the conversation simply will not go well, right? Because the other person is not going to enjoy talking to you, right? So the tone is super important. We want to sound enthusiastic and we want to be happy. I know sometimes we don't want to, and it's a little difficult to, but we should do our best to have a good tone and to simply just enjoy it, right? And do our best and then our conversations will obviously increase and they'll be fun, right? We want our conversations to be fun. Lucas, it's all right. Don't worry that you're late. At least you're here now. We're gonna keep on going in this presentation. All right. So more rules. Rule number 4 is clarity. So you want to be clear. Try your best not to pick super advanced vocabulary, or simply if you know the other person is not as advanced in the language as you are, you want to make sure your clarity is correct, right? You want to make sure your clarity is as clear as possible. You don't want to use too crazy vocabulary. You do not want to use too much slang, because sometimes certain people will not understand the slang that you're using, and those kinds of things. When we speak, we want to do our best to be clear. We have to have clarity, all right? Next rule. This is super important, and it's something that we all do our best to have, and that is interruptions. Our rule of interruptions: simply do not interrupt. We should never interrupt, because when we interrupt, it is considered rude, it's considered disrespectful, and we never want to portray that, right? We want to portray how nice we are, and there are times, for example, if we're on the phone, we're in a bad mood, we had a bad day, it's understandable, but it's not an excuse to make sure you're always interrupting the other person, right? We want to make sure we're as nice and as genuine and kind as possible. All right. And arguably the biggest rule when it comes to speaking on the phone or speaking in general is show you're listening. If the other person is talking, make sure you listen. Add some things to make sure they know you're listening, right? You could say, okay, I agree. Those little phrases go a long way, because to the other person, it shows that you are listening, and it shows that you actually care about what they have to say. And a lot of the times, if we just sit there and let all the information come in without paying attention, or showing that we're listening, the information will just go in one ear, like I mentioned earlier, and it will come out the other. And we never want those situations to happen, right? We want to make sure the information that goes in this ear will go straight to our head. All right. So we have to show that we're listening. All right. So now that we've talked about some of the basic rules when it comes to having conversations on the phone or any conversation in general, let's talk about those situations that we will encounter. All right. But as we talk about these situations, you're going to hear me talk about different types of speakers. All right. So every person is categorized into one of these 3 speakers. So the first type of speaker we're going to discuss is an apathetic speaker. An apathetic speaker is someone worried about the other person's needs, all right? So they're always going to be asking, how can I help you? What can I do to make sure you're doing all right? And they put the other person's priorities over their priorities, right? To let the other person speak first, and then they will speak second, right? That is an apathetic speaker. And then a defensive speaker is someone who is never in the wrong. It is never their fault, right? So if you do talk to someone, for example, you are a boss and you're talking to someone in your team, and they are always like, oh, it wasn't me, I didn't do that, it was an accident, whatever. It was never their fault. That person is categorized as a defensive speaker. And then the last type of speaker is a curious speaker, and that is simply based on the type of speaker they are. That means they ask a lot of questions, all right? They're going to make sure they have everything in depth. They're going to ask as much questions as possible so that there is not a big chance of making a mistake, right? So it's not a bad thing, but you never want to be overly curious, right? You never want to ask too personal questions. If you ask questions during a conversation, make sure you keep on topic, right? You don't want to ask questions on a random topic that has no business in your conversation, right? If you ask questions, do your best to make sure it's on topic, all right? So those are the 3 types of speakers. Apathetic puts the other person before themselves. Defensive, never their fault. They'll never take responsibility for their actions. And then curious is a person who asks a lot of questions. All right. So now let's finally get into those scenarios, guys. So the boss, all right, the boss, someone who is in charge of you. What all could we learn? Now, there are two scenarios that when it comes down to talk to your boss, all right? Your boss either calls you or you call your boss, right? That's about it when it comes down to having conversations with your boss, right? Now, why did I pick these two scenarios to talk about, all right? Well, let's talk about the rules for each scenario first, all right? Whenever we talk to our boss, that person is in charge of us. That person obviously has authority and power. So we want to be respectful, right? We don't want to portray that we think we're better than them because in the company we are not. In the company, if we have a boss, that means that person was there for a reason, right? They're either good at their job or they've worked at the company for a long amount of time and they are good at what they do. And it's important for us to be respectful to our bosses because, like I said earlier, we never want to portray that we want to be better than someone or we think that we're better than someone because that is not a good look, right? So we want to be respectful to our bosses. And we have to do our best to have some preparation. So be prepared. If your boss says he's going to call you, do a quick brush up on the stuff you've been doing at work. What kind of projects have you been having? What are the recent reports from, for example, if you're in sales, how are the sales going? Those kinds of things. Simply be familiar with how well you're doing or how your company or your team is doing. So that if your boss does call you or your boss asks you to call him, you have some sustenance to keep up the conversation, right? So make sure you do your best to have some preparation as well as always do your best to be respectful, right? Now, let's do a little more in-depth discussion on these scenarios, all right? So scenario one was your boss calls you. If your boss calls you, you want to be a listener, all right? If your boss calls you and he doesn't specifically tell you, I want you to explain this, just listen, all right? Make sure you soak up as much information as possible from your boss. And you also want to accept criticism, all right? Do not be an overly defensive speaker, all right? While it's important to be defensive and to explain your side, you never want to be overly defensive and not accept criticism, all right? Constructive criticism, that is some of the best things in life because it shows how you can be better. And it's always important to want to be better, right? And be curious. Ask your boss, why did you call me? How can I help you? What can I do for you, right? Be a curious speaker, all right? What I mentioned, do not be overly curious. If you are curious, that's all right. Ask questions, but if the questions you ask are off topic, do not ask those questions. Do your best to ask questions that make sense and that are on the topic, all right? Now, if you call the boss, if you call someone who is in charge of you, you want to be careful with your tone, all right? You do not want to sound like you're in charge because you're not. If you are talking to your boss, make sure you recognize and portray to the best of your ability that your boss is up here and you are down here, right? Now, do not degrade yourself, obviously. You are still very important. You have self-worth, but be careful with your tone. If you're talking to your boss, never portray it like you are in charge of your boss because you're not, right? The boss is always going to be in charge of you. Now, next thing, be flexible. Be flexible to the parts of the conversation that you're going to have, right? Do not go to call your boss and only think, okay, I'm only going to talk about this and I'm not going to talk about anything else. You want to be flexible, all right? So it also comes with having the preparation, right? Have good information on multiple topics at your work so that whatever your boss wants to talk about, you have an ability to have conversation with him there, all right? And the next thing, be certain. If you call your boss, do not be timid. Do not stand there and be like, well, sir, I'm not sure. Be certain, all right? And if you don't know, just say you don't know. Well, sir, I'm sorry, I don't know, right? Be certain that what you say, you know you about, right? You do not want to be a 50-50 person and say, well, it's kind of going well. The sales, I think, are going up. Well, no, that's not how you should talk to your boss, right? You should talk to your boss like, well, sir, I think that the sales have been going up. Work has been going really well. My sales have increased. Those kinds of things a boss appreciates, right? Because it shows that you're serious and you're genuine about your work, all right? So Now let's move on from boss to coworker, all right? Now, a coworker, there's not too much information that is needed to be discussed here, but a coworker, like I mentioned earlier, is someone who you work with. Now, know if it's casual or a formal conversation. Sometimes, if we do talk to our coworkers, sometimes it's just casual, right? A lot of the times, we do develop relationships with our coworkers, right? Our friendships, those kinds of things. So, if it's casual, that's all right. You don't have to be so worried about making sure everything's great. But if it's formal, still do your best to be prepared, all right? For example, your coworker and people in your team, you want to be prepared, know what you're doing at work, right? If you don't know what you're doing at work, that should have you question what exactly are you doing, right? Because you should know what exactly is happening at your workplace, all right? Now, let's talk about an informal conversation. If it's informal, just enjoy the conversation, but be professional if it's work related, right? For example, you're at the water cooler at work and you're simply just wanting to have a conversation. Be formal, right? But there is also, it's an informal conversation, right? Be professional because you're at work, but if you're outside of the work area, go ahead and enjoy the relationships with your friends, right? That's about it. Now, next, our clients. And like I mentioned earlier, our clients, this is the third area, and our clients are the people who use our company or they use you or something like that for services, all right? Now, similar to how we are interacting with our boss, there's only two scenarios that we need to really break down. First one is when you call them and when they call you. Now, like I mentioned before, there are rules no matter what. When it comes to our clients, we really need to know your material, all right? What is your company about? What services does it offer? Why should they pick you? Those kinds of things. Know your material. If they ask you, why should I pick you? And you cannot explain that, that means you do not know your material well enough, right? So make sure you do your best to portray that you know your material. Also, here you want to be a mix of apathetic and a curious speaker. Remember, apathetic is when you put their needs before yours. So when it comes down to being a speaker in this situation, you want to make sure that your clients are satisfied, right? If this is what he wants to know, then you tell him that, right? Or if apathetic, how can I help you, sir? What can I do to improve how I am performing based in your opinion? Those kinds of things go a real long way when it comes down to your clients. And be curious, ask questions, but make sure the questions you ask are on topic, because if they're not, no one's going to enjoy that, right? So now, client scenarios, let's go more in depth. So when you call them, you prepare questions and answers, all right? And do your best to control your emotions, because sometimes it will get a little hard to control our emotions. Maybe the client is being rude or disrespectful, but do your best to control your emotions. Your emotions should not portray how you treat someone. Your emotions are valid, but if someone's being rude, it doesn't give you cause to be rude back, especially if it's a client. I never want to be rude to a client. So prepare questions when you call them and the answers to those questions, and control your emotions. Now, next scenario is when they call you. You want to do your best to not interrupt. When they call you, listen to what they have to say before you reply, right? So for example, if they're calling about a complaint, do not cut them off. Make sure they are able to portray every single thing they want to say, and then you give your answer, all right? And care for their needs, right? Care for their needs. You want to make sure you sustain. If they have an issue, that's all right. Explain to them and care for their needs, all right? Now, we're going to go through a little section where we're going to talk about some true or false statements before we wrap up the presentation. So I'm going to read a statement and you're going to tell me in the chat if it's true or if it's false, all right? So I expect good participation here, guys. So first one, people can be categorized into 3 categories of speakers. Is that true or is that false? What is the answer to number 1? People can be categorized into 3 different categories of speakers. Is that true or false? I'll give about 10 seconds. Super quick, super easy answer. Go ahead and let me know. Is this true or false? Very good. It's a true statement. Good job, everyone. Next one, statement number 2. When you talk to your boss, you are in charge. Is that a true statement or a false statement? When you talk to your boss, you are in charge. Is that true or false? Go ahead. Let me know. Is that true or false? It's false. Exactly. Correct, guys. Because when you're talking to your boss, no matter if you are the one who is leading the presentation or whatever it is, you are still not in charge, right? Your boss is still your boss no matter what. Next one. Number 3. Let your emotions be what drives you when speaking to a client. Now, should your emotions be in charge when you speak to a client? Is that true or is that false? Go ahead, let me know in the chat. Is this a true statement or is it a false statement? Exactly, guys. It's a false statement. It's not true. Our emotions, while they are able to help us, they should not be the only thing that drive our conversations, right? We want to be, have an outline or whatever it is. Our emotions cannot control every single thing that we say. Great job, guys. Next one, number 4. Speaking fast shows your fluency and skill. Is that a true statement or is that a false statement? Speaking fast shows your fluency and your skills. True or false? This is a false statement, right? Just like we mentioned earlier, just because you speak fast, it doesn't mean you know everything, right? You want to have a good pace when you speak. You don't want to be too fast and you don't want to be too slow. Very good. Next one. Speaking loud shows that you are enthusiastic. So being loud, talking very loud, shows that you are an enthusiastic speaker. Is that true or is that false? Okay, guys, it's a false statement because just because you speak loud doesn't mean you're enthusiastic. I could yell all I want during a conversation, but that doesn't mean I'm enjoying it, right? That doesn't mean I'm being an enthusiastic speaker. Very good. Next one, our last one. No matter who you speak to, be respectful in a work context, all right? So if it's related to work, you want to do your best to make sure you are respectful. Is that true or is that false? This is a true statement. Exactly. Very good, right? Because when it comes down to work, no matter who it is, you want to make sure you are respectful. Very good, guys. Great job. It shows you paid attention and it shows you know how to behave when it ends certain information that we learned in this presentation. Good job. Proud of all of you guys. So now we're going to go into a Q&A section. And this is simply if you have any questions that you'd like to ask, go ahead and ask those questions and I'll do my best to answer them. But for those of you who have no questions, I'll throw up this poll and it simply asks you this question. Was the webinar useful? Yes or no, right? Did you learn something? It's all right. If you didn't, that's fine. But we want to make sure everybody got their needs catered to, right? The whole point of these presentations is to make sure you all learn something. So, did you learn something? Yes or no? All right. So, I'll leave this up for about another 10 seconds and then I'll throw up poll number 2. All right. Good job, guys. Thank you for filling that out. Now, poll number 2 is similar, but it's different. The question, poll number 2, is do you want to participate again in the future? Yes or no, guys? Let me know. All right, so it seems like most people do want to participate again in the future. That's awesome to see. That's great to know, guys. Thank you very much. So, all right, so I'll leave about another 10 to 5 seconds. Well, I should say 5 to 10, and then we'll move on to the next part of this presentation. All right, so thank you guys for filling out the poll. I appreciate that. So, before we wrap up this presentation, guys, make sure you follow Tutlo on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Keep in touch with the English community, and you'll actually get some very helpful learning tips provided on these social media platforms, right? Social media is everywhere. why not learn it? Use it to help you learn your language, all right? So, from the bottom of my heart, guys, thank you very much for coming into this presentation. I appreciate each and every one of you guys that gave your time today to learn something, and I hope you did learn something. So I do hope I get to see you guys again soon, whether through that's a private lesson on Tutlo or in another presentation soon, guys. It was a blast as always to be with you guys. So everyone, have a great rest of your week. Stay safe, and I'll see you guys again soon. Goodbye.